All right, welcome back to the Conquest Corner. On this particular episode, we are going to be talking about what was shown at the most recent happy hour, including the new faction, ninth faction. They had shown us a little bit of a picture or so some people had ideas that it would be maybe samurai themed or something like that, but I'm not sure anyone had exactly in mind what I ended up seeing, which is the Yoroni, and we will get into that. This is not the deep dive through the Yoroni. I am doing one of those. But for this one, the thought was more just to discuss it a little bit, to talk about what we see from them, the general idea, and just to kind of get a little bit of excitement related to it. Before long, we'll be actually going through, taking a look at it all, because I do plan on playing it or playing against it with some proxy stuff, because we do have enough of the rules, and I know at least myself, I got enough brute stance to get through it either way. So can at least give it a shot and see what happens. All right, so for this particular happy hour, they discussed a few different things. I want to mostly just talk about the new faction, but we'll talk about some other stuff as well. For this, they gave us some very minor rules updates that they talked about. At time of recording, we don't have those in front of us, although depending on when you watch this, on Monday we're supposed to get that. This adds mostly just some little clarifications, no real change, which works well because I've been putting together a series of like learn to play for new players and stuff like that. But I didn't want to do it before we found out if there's going to be any drastic changes, because I don't want to say something and then, the next day that's invalidated. Assuming what they've said there is true, you should be seeing that hopefully in about a week or so, at least the first parts of it. But the big part, okay, we did get the 100 Kingdoms one. If you go, it is available now, so you can take a look at their changes. Their changes I discussed before, but we do have their changes, and I'm going to be going through that in a separate one. But I know at least me, I'm rather excited about some of those changes because they're now trying to branch it out more than they did before. They now sort of have these three pieces and the ways in which they do or don't work together. But the biggest thing related to all this was the Yoroni. So let's take a look at the rules for this just to discuss the basic ideas. We're just going to do a very broad overview of this. So when we take a look at this, one of the biggest things, full disclosure, I really like the idea of this army. I like what they did. I will say, and I think some other people said similar things. I saw them really saying so in the chat, that when you take a look at them, actually, I think that's here. It's a little bit zoomed in, so can't necessarily say everything. But they showed us the outline of the Obon. So they showed us that one. But what we're seeing here, so obviously has a very Japanese-inspired feel. The names fit that. They're all different, either spirits and all of those from ancient Japanese cultures. And, all of that. But what they're doing for this is only a brute faction. So brutes and monsters, I should say, essentially no infantry. Everything is individuals sitting on their stands, whether they're multiple brutes there or a giant monster. We know the names of some of the monsters. We know the ideas of what they do. We just haven't seen any of them yet. One, I think as a concept, this is actually really, really great. This means a few different things. One, I currently, let me flip back to this. So for anyone who's watching instead, here is, might be a little bit hard to see, is my tray of my Maharabati that I am currently painting. I have 24 of them. I'm hoping to be done them in about another day or so. I'm kind of working on some Trench Crusade stuff as well. And I've been a little bit lazy about painting because, winter break, I decided to actually take a little bit of a break from things. But that's 24 of those. And I have 24 of this other unit, and 24 of this other infantry, or maybe even more of a different one. My Rajakur, I have over 24 of them if I decide to paint them all. And I have painted all but like 2 stands, I would say. Same thing with my ghouls, and I think at this point all my Old Dominion is done. But when I look at other factions, I think about, where might I branch? What else might I work on? And it's assembling and painting the amount of infantry that sometimes gives me pause. And I understand it does the same thing for other people. Now, that's not to say it would stop me from doing any of that, or maybe should stop you. I mean, obviously you don't have to paint it all up. You can take your time with it, have fun. But it can be intimidating when you look at a force and say, oh, I want to start spires. Oh man, I'm going to have to paint about 100 models. Where here, you're now looking at one, being brutes or monsters. You're looking at the larger models. They can just be sometimes a lot more fun to paint. I personally, when I'm painting 24 of something, I will give it decent detail, but I'm going for tabletop standard. I'm not trying to go for that extra level. I will do that with my brute units. I will do that for my monsters. So an army of just those sort of things means I can go that extra step without it, taking me forever. We might be looking at having to paint, 24 models instead of 24 models for my unit. Yes, they're bigger models. Yes, each one will take longer than maybe an individual guy, or maybe not technically. But even if they do, you're not having to go through nearly as much. So I think a Brutes and Monsters faction is a very interesting take that honestly I didn't foresee. Thinking about it, it makes sense. If you want to add variety, one good way to add variety is to both restrict and non-restrict the choices. And we're going to talk about what that means. So another thing that they did, and I have the bonuses of what the ideals are off on the side of the screen, as you can see, because without those, it doesn't make sense to talk about this. But rather than having essentially your standard, activation type cards or command cards, however you want to call them, they have ideal cards. So they said this is your Japanese inspired faction, which if you are not playing a Japanese inspired game, you don't see a lot of Japanese inspired factions. It's much more common to see usually Chinese inspirations. So I do think it's really cool. As someone who plays Bushido, and specifically I play the Tengu faction in that, I am very excited to see this sort of stuff. I think adds a very different aesthetic for some people to get into. And hey, you're going to need less models. Very good as well. But there's two big, or really three, because we talked about the Brutes and Monsters. One of the other big things is this ideal cards. So whatever your regiment or character is, by their essentially ideal, that's the ideal they add into the pot. And when you're going, you'll stack your cards, the ideal cards, but you'll stack your cards as normal. And when you pull a card, a unit's going to go. However, you don't have to have the unit that matches the ideal activate on that particular ideal card. So they have changed the names a little bit. They changed them to try to fit the cultural names better. So let's say you have a Ka unit and a Chi unit. Okay, they're both in my stack. When I pull my Ka card, I can have the Chi unit taken instead. So you get a lot of flexibility. Effectively, for all intents and purposes, whoever wants to go gets to go when a card gets drawn. However, if you go at particular intervals or particular card choices, then you get better things. So depending on what you put in the army depends on what kind of card you're going to have access to. And if the unit or character that activates has the same ideal as the card that activates them, you get a bonus. So as it says, if your Ka unit is activated by a Ka card, you get +1 impact and +1 brutal impact till the end of the round. For Chi, you're getting Dominable 2. Fu gives +2 to march distance for its first march action. Remember, so if it's a Fu unit getting activated by a Fu card, or the same sort of thing can happen for characters. Your character doesn't have to match the type that goes in. So you could have a Fu character reading a Ka type unit, and then you have some ways to stack some extra bonuses and all. We're going to go through all that. And some of that, I will admit, we don't know all the intricacies yet, because we can see what they wrote, but things may change. Who knows? The army doesn't come out for, at this point, the better part of 2 months or a little bit more. So it is what it is for the moment, at least. But it means that you get lots of flexibility. But if you still stack them in the order that you actually truly want your activations, their units will be better. So your units probably in general, reading through them, good, don't get me wrong. But probably usually what usually happens for this the same way they did for a little bit of Nords and things like that. Wadrun really. Maybe technically a little bit of Nords, but more Wadrun. Your units, not quite as much as they could be, but this gives them an extra bump. So your unit is fine, but if you do it in the right way, you get to be that better tier. The other thing is they don't chain activate. So character goes doesn't get to chain into its unit, which, helps in this. So that way you can't just have anything go at any point in whatever way you want with chain activations. So I did not foresee this coming, personally. Um, I do really like this idea. I like how they broke a basic tenet of the game, because at the end of the day, that's what you want armies to do. Armies should be breaking the main structure of a game. They shouldn't break it necessarily beyond repair. They should break it in a way that can still fit a balance, and this can, because if they find like, ooh, being able to go with these units whenever is a little much, you could scale the units back a little bit and maybe up the ideal effects a little bit more. Similar to what they did Wadroon. They essentially made their bonus not quite as strong off of the chanting, but the units are a little bit better, and you might have a specialized when a chant happens on you, you get better. So the base abilities aren't as good, but the units got better. Here, they could go one way or the other as needed. So they're giving themselves ways to help that balance. So far, just haven't gone through it. Seems fine. Gotta honestly really try it out to get a better impression. In a moment, we'll get into what I think about the general look of the army in terms of power. But every army should really be breaking a rule, or changing a rule, or altering a rule. And this was something they hadn't really messed with in this sort of way before. I know we have some spots of, Spire Biomancers being able to pull multiple cards and all, and some other spots like that as well. Same thing, Sorcerer Kings. We have some ways to be able to pull some cards after different types of effects. But here's a way that fundamentally changes the way that you process this. This also means that if you are a brand new player, this is really forgiving. At base, man, how many times it happened to you where you put a card somewhere and you're like, this is either the greatest decision ever or the worst, depending on if I say win this roll or what they do first. Well, you don't have to worry about that here. You can still stack to be better, but if you figure out like, man, this unit needs to go now or my whole plan's going to collapse, just have them go. But then they don't get their bonus because it's the wrong ideal card. They still get to go. Because the other option is maybe if they wait, they're just going to be destroyed or hampered in some way that makes them useless. So I do think that's actually a really good thing. I will say, when you read through this, there's a few things. Maybe they cleaned it up. I looked at the original form. This is an updated one, but they do have to fix this up a little bit. Because originally when you read it, the original reading was that the regiment needed to be the same type as the ideal to get the bonus, and it didn't say the character did, but later on it does talk about how they had to match. I think they do have to match. There's another spot, one of the other big things in which they break this. I had to figure out where they have it. Here it is. The other big way they break this is modular regiments. Now again, the way they talked in two different spots were a little bit different. The way modular regiments work is there's some units that are modular. You have your leader in there. He has some particular type, and it should be, you have to be minimum 2 stands and more than half. Now later it doesn't say more than half. I think the intention is the more than half. It's just weirdly worded in another spot. But essentially, you have to be at least 2 stands, and more than half has to match the same type as the leader. But you can throw in different things. This gives a lot of flexibility. Since you're only brutes, you are going to be more restricted in general in your options. You're not necessarily going to be able to have the giant units that you do in other spots. We know, especially by playing this, I did this related to the Road to Heos lists, that in general, brutes, unless your army was a brute-focused army, such as, say, Sorcerer Kings, you didn't see a lot of them. Or if you did, you saw very specific ones. Oh, it was Old Dominion, you saw Bone Golems. That's what you saw. Raptor Riders, when you looked at Wadroon. I think there were some Thunder Riders, but like Raptor Riders were a big thing and stuff like that. So you saw very focused pieces. Well, now you have an army that is effectively, at least for the moment, only brutes. You can proxy some of the monsters as well. But to get around sort of the restrictions of that, you can kind of mix and match these a little bit. And they give you their various rules, and they do give you, for some of them, see if we can find one right here. There we go, Take Flight. Hey, if you're only Tengu, whether you're the Bushi or the Akashi, then you get a special rule. So there's a reason for not intermixing them, but if you intermix, still be quite good. And the battlefield role of the unit fits whatever the lead stand is, wherever its command stand essentially is. They give you a list that are modular. They give you some that are not modular. They give you some monsters. all really good. So just at the base level, here's a faction that effectively breaks the rules of the game, breaks it in an interesting way, gives you very different sort of list builds. As someone who's experienced with the game, I can see how this is really good for beginners because they can just go with whatever they feel like. But if you're someone who's more experienced, or as they learn, they can start looking for different synergies. They can look for the way they put their modular units together. What do you actually want? What is the best way to put these things in here? So it opens up a lot of that. And that's what we see for now. Who knows what's going to be added to this in the future? Let's talk a little bit about the catalog, though, because they revealed this, and this is essentially the big reveal. Some of these we already knew. We already knew the Crusading Noble was coming out. Looks great. This is the sort of look. I've thought about the 100 Kingdoms Horse Army. I don't know. There's one sitting at the store. We'll have to see. But if so, this is the sort of look that I like, personally. I'm not a big fan of some of the peasant stuff. That's just me. Sakari, we know they're coming out. Honestly, very cool look. Sort of monks in robes sort of feel for there. And honestly, for that faction, a very different look, which I appreciate. We know the Archangel's making its way, and there's some lore stuff about it as well. There's some lore stories, so you can learn all about them. The redone Men-at-Arms and the Crusaders, the dual kit for that. Those are all things that we knew. Those are all things that are dropping like this month. The new army, of course, the Yoroni. So they give you an artisan series. Personally, I absolutely love this. I love the foxes around. I don't know if I'm going to do anything with this army. Partly I have to see if maybe they want to send me something. If so, I'd love to do it. I do absolutely love the thought of this army. But no matter what, I might still get this just because I really like the look of it. And I'll look at that one down there. So we'll have to see. But I mean, hey, if they're watching, we'll make plenty of content about it if I have any of this stuff in my hands. They currently showed off some of their leaders, of course. They had the Daimyo, Oyobun, which is the guy that showed before, and the Kasune. There's two different forms for this. It's a dual kit, obviously, depending which way you want to build it. All of this particular, most of these, I think, are March. We'll take a look at those in a second. The Domaru Damashi, they talked about, and there's still sculpting, so it could change because these guys, I think, are end of April. But they talked about how these guys are going to be a pain to put together. And taking a look at it, yeah, take a look. So this arm is only actually connected to the flowing bits underneath of him, not actually connected to him here. We see the same thing here, the different, whatever it's actually technically supposed to be. Probably a cloth or a fabric or however they want to put it. But yeah, they're probably going to be a pain. But you know what, personally, I put together very tough models in the past before. I played, Malifaux 2nd edition, where you had some characters where, one of the most famous ones, one of the characters' beards was 3 pieces, 2 in front, 1 behind, and when you clicked it on, you could never see the one behind it. That was because really that game at the time was more CAD design with thoughts of how to fit on a sprue well without actually fitting the models well. Very different here. Yeah, I'd have to put these guys together with plastic glue because you need them. It's going to take a little bit, but they need to be stuck together forever. They need to actually be essentially welded together. The Kami. Wondering how many giant goofy eyeballs we're going to see put onto these guys. That's honestly the same thing I would do. The Kappa, or the Kappabushi. So Kappas, as they mentioned, actually has a very interesting thing. They're essentially more of like lizards, but actually underneath the helmets, they have like their head has water in it, and were that to spill out and lose it, they're essentially destroyed. So I really do like the look of those. The Oni, so these are more of the demons. Not quite as inspiring to me personally. I think it's absolutely fine. I do like this sort of spirit Japanese aesthetic, but I usually prefer it more for the ones that look like creatures rather than sort of the Oni look, which is much more of a demons and all. They're fine though. I don't think they're bad. I'm not a big fan of the eye patch on the one, but overall, though, I do think they are actually quite good. I'll put this way, the sculpting is good. The models are good. The look is not just something that I prefer personally. But that changes when we get to Tengu. The Tengu Bushi and then the shooting forms, absolutely love those. Like I said, that's a faction that I already play. When I was looking at my different lists and units, I think they actually said all of them have instruments, or each of the units have instruments in different ways. You can see his... I'm not even going to guess at the name of the particular instrument. Guitar-like, but I'm sure it has a very particular name. I just personally don't know, and I don't want to say the wrong thing there. But these models I absolutely love. Especially also when they come in the bow forms. I think these are great. Looking through the rules, I think most of these modular units are actually pretty good. I think this is a unit that you would keep together because this is your shooting unit. I'm not so worried about the fly part, but you want the ranged, and you have at least one character with ranged. Might be more than one, but I don't know all of it. Fantasy exclusive for Bounty of the Elements. So, for anyone who doesn't know Sorcerer Kings well, there's an upgrade, 40 points, or at least the last time I used it was 40 points. Upgrade for them was essentially you can get them to go into a brute unit by taking this upgrade. This is the way that they're illustrating that. I do think it looks absolutely beautiful. So currently the sorcerer tends to be the female sculpt for what we have. My Bounty to the Elements is almost always my Raj. So yes, this one can count as the Raj. It doesn't really matter so much. But I'd probably actually put this on head on, so maybe it looks a little bit different to me, but that's just the way the sculpts have. It obviously has the current modeled sorcerer sort of look to it, but I always run the Raj, I think almost always for this personally. But great looking Founders Day exclusive, and that's going to be available just for a little bit. We know they're updating the one starter sets now. They said specifically that in these updates for these one starter sets, they want to have options they didn't have before. So either new units, this one is mostly all new units, the new stuff coming out, or they want to make sure it doesn't already coincide with like the 5th edition starters, which will still be out for a little bit. Depending on what type of faction you want, all of them are good savings. Whether or not they're good for the list you want to build is another thing. Like me personally, for any Spire stuff, no, I don't really care about Strix. Roots of Course, Ferromants are great. You know, the Desolation drones are good. I don't want to assemble as many of the other guys as they have personally. But there's a unit that I don't ever take when I build lists with it. So not good for me, but could be good for you. We have the Dwig starter. They have the Nords, which the Nords we're seeing they're getting some of their newer units. The Bearstarks and Ulfin Yar, they're trying to fit them in. It does look in general, this one maybe not quite as much, but some of the other ones, they're trying to give them some of the more newer units or different units. For this, given the Warbred and the Dinosaurs are great. This one player starter, I mean, again, illegal warband is the other thing I should say. They always have to make sure it's actually legal to run. So they are somewhat restricted there as well. But this one incorporates a new kit. Some of the newer kits for this, with him, since he can actually take the Varangian. I might actually build even more Varangian personally, but that's just me. For city-states, again, I'm not going to talk too much about the starter sets. One player for the Sorcerer Kings, throwing in the monster, I think is actually great. If it's the same cost as the others, this one is quite good. The Sorcerer goes nicely into the Disciples, and ghouls are fine, and the big monster is quite great. So when you look at all these different starters, all of them are actually quite nice. I think all of them can work for the purpose that you want. If you had a 5th edition, you could pick this up as well. Now you're probably talking about getting pretty close to a full army, or at least close enough to be able to play, and then you can kind of build up from there. Not huge on this particular one, but that's just because I don't have really much interest in doing Wadroon. I have, to at least some level, an interest in almost every other faction. accept them personally, other than just like pure dinosaurs, but I don't think I want to do that. Now, this one is mostly dinosaurs on one side. It does give you the Yoroni on the other side. This is the only starter set for the full game, Last Argument of Kings, that we're going to have until, I think they said around October, or August, I should say, actually. 2-player starters are always about 200. If you do want both sides, or you have someone else who split it with you, you do get tons and tons of savings. But when I look at it, it just doesn't have the other piece that I want. The Quaddle's nice, but I have plenty of other models to paint rather than pick up models for fun. If I'm not going to build out enough of a full army, I'm not going to do it. And when you're talking about related to infantry, if I don't truly love it, I'm not going to do it. And I don't know if I'd want to do pure dinosaurs. I'd want some of those infantry. I'd want some slingers and all. I just don't think I want to paint all that stuff. But this will be out in March. So this is one way to get them. Although the better way, it's probably the next page, is the Cohort. So this is your First Blood box. First Blood box is about, I think they're always like 99, about $100. But if you actually tally it out, it gives you a legal just short of 800 point, 795 actually, without putting an upgrade on your leader. One, it's about 1,000 points for First Blood, but if you're not playing First Blood, if you're playing TLOK, this is just about 800 points. And you can actually build it out pretty good. This unit fully goes together. This is not a modular unit down here. And all the rest of them, let me see if I still have it put together here. There we go. So actually I did put this together. I put it as this particular Katsume. It's going to be dual kit. You put either one, but they're both the same points. This is me just testing it out. Not saying that this is actually good or not. You have, Domaru Damashi, as your little 3-pack. And you have 2 modular regiments. Because if you take a look at this box, you're getting 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you're getting 7 of the guys. So that's a 3 and a 4. Remember, whoever is your leader, you have to have more of that than anything else, is essentially over half. But since you're only building like 3s and 4s, essentially more than half. So what that boiled down to for this is 1 modular regiment is 2 of the Tengu Bushi and 1 Kappa. Because if you take a look, you got the Tengu and the Kappa. And then I'm putting the Oni, the other one, the Oni with the Kami. So you have 3 Kami, you have 1 Oni. You can put that together. So just about 800 points. That, and then you pick up some other boxes of this stuff, get you pretty far. So personally, if I'm starting this army up, this is my purchase. This is my first purchase. Gives me a little bit of the different units and try out the feel. Could always proxy and leave some open stands. Okay, you have a Kappa. Let me just assume I had 2 more. Let me leave that as a little 3-pack or maybe a 2-pack, because you can do 2-packs. I think 2-packs related to some of the bow units, I think, is particularly interesting to do for some of the Tengu, my apologies. Curious to see how that actually plays out. Knowing sometimes that can be hard to work with, I would be cautious with things that want to be in close combat, because you could get wrecked before you get there. But for some shooting units, little packages of 2 might not be bad. They might be able to actually sit, say, far on the sides or sit between some of your other units. I find sometimes, I like having, 4 stands wide of shooting, but they want to stay in the back. The other units are going to pop in front. I start losing line of sight. I can start having issues with that. One, with them being brutes, they'll be able to see, actually, what I should say is, since you're only brutes, normally you could put your infantry in front. Your brutes are bigger. They can see over them. That's not the case in here. So you're going to need actual line of sight. A little 2-pack might be easier sometimes. So that might be an interesting way to do that. They showed us how big the Archangel actually is to sword tip, but overall still very, very large. Absolutely impressive. They have different store kits and all of that. If your store does any of that, obviously, great. They showed us what's going to come, talked a little bit about what's going to come out some point later in the future, which is some of your monsters and your origami warriors as well, and then Wadroon. So they are going to obviously be the next lore box as well, and they're the 2 ones getting support. Um, but overall, I have to say for this, very excited for the things that they talked about. We know the next one that they're going to do, they're going to talk, I think they said in February, to talk through some more stuff for this. There's more things they haven't revealed to us. We know the earliest stuff for this, I want to say, is all like March 25th. Sorry, March 28th. I know some of them are later in April. Much like Sorcerer Kings, they're going to give you enough that if you want, you can make an army to kind of go with, but really probably by about April, you're probably kind of flushed out enough to try. The biggest thing is, when do they give you at least a monster? Since your things in general are 70 to 80 points a stand, you can fill out your points a little bit faster, maybe some other people can, but I think the monsters really help, especially to add some variety. And some of the monsters are actually quite good. One of them gets to keep the abilities rather than for the round from the ideals for the battle. But that is the releases that they showed us. That is especially consider this the Yoroni. Me personally, I think this is actually really nice. I'm glad they didn't go with, just pure samurai sort of build, because, oh, you have all these shinobi to put together, you have these samurai to put together, you have these other things. You would then, if they're doing infantry based, you'd probably have peasants and all of that. I just don't find that exciting personally. I have nothing against infantry stands, but this is a very different look that I think fits very well. It both gives you a look to it. So it gives you sort of that Japanese ancient cultures aesthetic that they have with these different spirits and all of that. It doesn't necessarily cause you to have to paint tons and tons and tons of models, which is great for anyone who's new. And then, they let you change up the base rule of the game. You don't do cards the same sort of way. You don't build a lot of your regiments the same sort of way. There are some regiments that are fully together as normal, but you have some of this modularity. So you can really play around with things. And at least for what they've shown us right now, there actually is a good amount of variety. Honestly, more than some variety we get, especially by around the April, than we have for some of these other factions. I know at least with Sorcerer Kings when it first came out, now we have our variety that these guys are kind of going to have by about a month after they're out. As always, though, keep in mind, of course, that if you're looking to pick up any of this, we do have a discount code in the show notes. Train Kickers, it saves you 10%, helps us out as well, especially for these sort of things. Saving that little bit, especially for new factions, is going to be really, really good. I think you're going to see this be very popular. Looking through at cursory glance, brand new factions are these usually high end or low end. That's just the way it happens. Partly the reason that happens is because people don't know how to play against them. People don't know how to play them. You don't have all of your tools available to you. So let's say you're only going to take a look at, what you'll have on the board. So you're not necessarily throwing your monsters in originally. Even if you throw them in. I think actually what would be interesting is, I think if you're not planning your activations perfectly, I think they will struggle a bit. And I think the reason that they're going to struggle a bit is just because you don't have the numbers. Your units are good. Their stats are pretty decent. Their special rules are pretty good. But you just have less. For 80 points for your min cost, since you have to have at least 2 stands or something, is, let's say, 150 points. Because I think some of the cheapest ones were something like the Tengu, which is like 75. So about 150 points. 150 points for 2 of them, I can get, depending on faction, 3 to sometimes 4 stands for about that cost. Sometimes, a tiny bit more, and now I'm at 4 to maybe 5 stands and all. So you're obviously just going to have less. That means you're going to have to be very careful with what you do, because you could get outplayed. However, since you can activate anything in any moment at maybe a little bit of a penalty, you don't get your ideal bonuses, but you activate anything whenever, means you have a lot more flexibility. And you're going to need that to be able to actually win with this faction, I feel. In the beginning, they'll do okay, but if you're against someone who has a lot of activation, you're going to potentially struggle quite a bit. As you start to learn them, I think these guys could potentially be up there in terms of power curve, because the way that you put your stands together, you could really choose some good optimizations. And if you are worried about an activation style meta, which can absolutely be a thing, that you could end up making it where you have multiple double packs. And, oh, this double pack, I'm taking them because they're a bit cheaper. I can get extra activation out of it. And they're the ones who are going to sit on these objectives. They're the ones who are going to do this, that, or the other thing for me. When you think of characters, sometimes it doesn't help having certain extra amounts of them. So, oh, maybe my character goes in that unit because now they're a 3-pack instead. And that gets me the footprint I want and the abilities I want and all of that sort of thing. We know these guys all have a free unbreak action, essentially, which means you're not quite as harmed by being in some of these smaller units, but you can really play with those sizes a bit more and that modularity. With the way they have it now, especially with those ideals, I think if you can activate correctly, I think this army can be very, very strong. But I think if you're just going, drawing your cards as you want, probably fine. Not near the bottom, I don't think, especially in terms of, difficulty and playability, but I think they actually could get up there. At least that's a cursory glance. What you should see hopefully soon is going to be the deep dive videos where we really go through and discuss this faction, talk about different things, talk about some lists, try to put together at least a couple different lists for them, talk about some, some sort of options. Like I said, hopefully soon. I have a tournament next week, so probably won't get a chance next week, but the week after, one or another, and actually test them out. Because like I said, we have enough of the profiles, have things to proxy with, can obviously just give it a shot and see how they perform. All right, well, that's going to do it for this particular one. Like I said, things that you should be seeing pretty soon. You're going to see some stuff about Trench Crusade. Might record some of the stuff with Dan tomorrow, but otherwise doing some stuff very related to Trench Crusade. Going to go through all of this. Going to go through the 100 Kingdoms updates. Going to be showing you some of the stuff we're working on. Steve and I are currently arranging to go through the Sorcerer Kings and City States lore pack. Probably going to start doing that on Sundays. Probably not this Sunday. At the time you're seeing this, it is Sunday. Probably be about a week or so after, either on a Sunday or Monday, but we're going to start doing that. So probably in about 2 or so weeks, you should start seeing some of those battle reports coming out. We want to go through that lore campaign, see how it plays out and all. And then definitely going to proxy some of these guys. I don't know if I'll tape it or not. I have to see how that works. But once they're out, someone is getting them. I don't know if it's me or Dan might be, but in terms of the show, we're absolutely going to want to play these guys, try them out, show you what it's all about, and everything like that. Like I said, I already mentioned the part about our discount code Train Kickers if you're trying to pick up this or anything like that. But, hopefully with this new year, we have this new faction. Now up to 9 factions for this game. Lots of variety. I would love to see this be a year. In my area, like I said, the game has some good traction. I'd love to see it gain a lot of traction in some different spots, and maybe a pure brute faction with a look that you don't find in a lot of other miniatures games that aren't just Japan, the miniatures game, or Japanese culture, the miniatures game, which there is a few of those. But when you get outside of that, I think that this has a lot of ability to draw some new people in. Personally, like I said, if nothing else, I'm going to be painting up that limited series and some Tengu. But probably once that box drops, the First Blood box, plan to get that, put it together, and then proxy some stuff out to kind of see and feel and go from there. Because I think some of these models, both new, do they look good, but brutes I actually really enjoy painting up. As Maharabadi, they've taken me a while. I don't mind painting them, but just I had to be in the right mood to sit down and do a lot of it, and I haven't lately. But brutes, I'm always in the mood to do. All right, well, that makes this thing go on for far longer than I anticipated, but hey, that's every single video I ever put out. All right, well, on behalf of everyone here at the show, then, have a good hobby. It's a great gaming.